Before we actually go to the command line and start playing around with permissions and changing permissions, I wanted to go over the syntax. So here you have a couple of different examples of what you can do as far as changing permissions on the system go. You'll see right here that we run the Chmod command, once again stands for change mode, because that's what the system in Unix terms we're doing. We're changing the mode of the file. After that, we tell it what entities we want to modify. And now remember, what do we have? We have users, we have groups, and we have the others. U, G, O. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying users, groups, and others. And then we're saying what the permissions should be, what the mode of the file should be, and then finally we're saying what file we're modifying. So let me just clear that a little bit. And then we'll go over exactly what you're seeing there. So in the first one, what we're saying is for the users, groups, and others, we want all their permissions to be read, write, and execute. So that would look like this once we actually executed the command. It would be read, write, execute for the user, read, write, execute for the group, and read, write, execute for everybody else, or the others. The second command, we're actually specifying out different permissions for each entity. And I typically wouldn't do it like this. There's actually an easier way of accomplishing something like this, and that's with the octal method of changing, or the numeric method of changing permissions. So we're looking at the alpha way of doing it now with the RWX, but we could actually use numbers, because remember, computers like numbers, to accomplish the same task. And I'll show you how to do that in another video. So this one here, we're saying user gets read, write, execute, group gets write, and others gets read. And so that would look like this. It would be read, write, execute for the user, and then dash W, whoops, and then dash for that. So you'll notice that the positions of the permissions do not change. So R is always in this position, W always in the middle, and then X is always at the end. And so if we go down here, the others would get read and nothing else. And so it would be R dash dash, and that would be this one here, right here. And then we can also just change one permission. So in this third example, we're saying user and group get the right permission. So it's only going to add the right permission to the user and the group. We can also subtract. So we can say equals to. We can just say with the add sign, we can say add this to the existing permissions. And to subtract, to remove permissions, we can just use the minus symbol to remove it. So this would remove the right permission from the others to the my file. And then this down here is just two different ways we can accomplish the same task. Notice we have all entities, user, group, others, and we're saying that we're going to add rewrite to the file for each of those. Well, UGO can be represented by an A for all. That would accomplish the same task. All right, so let's go take a look at that now. All right, for this demonstration, I've created a sales directory, and we can look at the permissions on the sales directory. Here are the default permissions, and so we know that the user root has read, write, execute, the group root has read and execute, and everybody else on the system has execute, and we're going to use student as a demonstration. So we'll look at changing the permissions and what it does from the perspective of the sales directory. So read, write, and execute. How is student getting in here? Student is getting in here by those permissions right there. So student can CD into that sales directory and view the content of the directory. Now, if student tries to touch a file or create a file in here, he'll get an error message. Right, permission denied. And that's because if we go back over here and look at it, student does not have the ability to write to that directory. So I'm going to change the permissions on the directory as root. Remember, you can change your own permissions on your files that you own, but only root can change it for the system. So I will smod the file, and what I'll do is O plus W to /sales. Now that's changed the permissions If we go back here and up arrow, press it again, sure enough, student can now add a file to that. Student can also read files in here also. So if I cat, I have a little bit in that test file right there. I'll cat the test file. And student can read the contents of the test file. So if I remove the read permission from this directory, so what I'll do now is chmod O minus R from the directory. Look at the permissions again. There they are. And we go back over here, and I'll go up, clear my screen, so then I'll do an LL in here. Before we were able to do this, right, I get a permission denied. So even though I have the write permission to the directory and the write permission, the execute permission to the directory, I can get into the directory, I can't read its contents. So that's a problem. Let's go back here. I can still touch items in here, so let's try that. So let's say touch new file. All right, I can still do that, but I still can't read the contents because the R has been removed from the other's position. So I'll put that back, up arrow, and I'll just add a plus to that and put it back. And now we should be able to go back over here, do an LL here, and sure enough, now we can read the contents. Now, here is the problem with the W command. Typically, you're not going to, let me clear my screen and put the permissions back up here again. This particular permission is very, very dangerous to give to everyone on the system. And as a matter of fact, when directories are created by default, the system removes the write permission, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And the reason it is so dangerous is because given that permission to somebody allows them to delete anything in the directory. So for instance, we can go back here and we can see there's a couple of files owned by root. And as a matter of fact, I will chmod the root file. I can't do that here. Got to go back over to this one. I will chmod the root file. And what I will say is A equals nothing for the root file. Basically, I'm saying no permissions on the root file. I'll do an LL here. And sure enough, there you go. Picture this now. It's root owned by root, no permission set to it, so basically nobody has any rights to this file at all. But because the student has this permission and it's picking up through the others, then that user will be able to delete those files. So let's go check that out. So once again, in here, there's the file. I'll say rm-f root file. Boom, gone. LL in here again. File is gone. So that's really dangerous. So we're going to take that one away. We'll let student have read and execute to this folder, but we're not going to allow student to have the right. So, oops, O minus W on the /sales directory. Much better. Come back over here. Now let's see if student can delete something else in here. We'll say, what's the other root file? Test file is the other file in here. And sure enough, because we removed that permission, student cannot delete that file. So that's a good example of the importance of some of the permissions, especially as they apply to folders on our system. In the next video, we'll continue on. We'll talk about the special permissions, and we'll look at the octal way of accomplishing this task.